Okay, so we're going to finish up talking about chapter 4 and 5. We've been talking about them simultaneously since the first part of last week when we started Unit 2. So social structure is the overarching subject of everything in this unit, all three chapters that we're covering. And today we're going to continue with chapter 4 and 5 overlapping and probably be able to begin just the very start of chapter 6, which is called Deviant Behavior, and it's related to social structure because these norms that we've been talking about, the social facts that exist on the macro scale that drive behaviors on the micro scale. Does everybody always follow the acceptable side of norms in life, or do some people either choose consciously or even accidentally fall in the unacceptable side of norms in life? Right, so we will examine that kind of question. Okay? So, we finished talking about leadership. What was the last thing we said about leadership? Whoever told me where we stopped. Okay, so we were talking about the different kinds of leadership, the different ways that you can be an effective leader yourself. So we focused on that word expressive, which we talked about with primary groups, and then instrumental, which we talked about with secondary groups. But in leadership style, you can be an expressive leader, and that is somebody who appeals to what in a person? Your emotional connection. We have an emotional connection. I'm going to foster that emotional connection, and because I foster that emotional connection, you're going to be more likely to want to be effective for me if I'm your leader. You're going to feel that there's some kind of, let me use the word kinship between us, to where I count on you and you want to be counted on, and we have a happy relationship like that. Some people respond really well to that kind of leadership. How would you know whether they didn't respond well?
I guess by their actions.
By their actions would be one way. Are there other ways to tell what people? By body language, right? By the way that they gesture, their posture. Do they roll their eyes at you? Do they do whatever, right? You can pick up messages from people based on all kinds of forms of communication. Not only verbal communication, but nonverbal communication also. And so that's what we're going to kind of branch back into chapter 4 just a little bit today and talk about the micro scale behavioral patterns that all of us are constantly interpreting throughout our daily lives. Okay? So, there is a very famous sociologist, a micro scale sociologist. His name is Erving Goffman. I believe back in chapter 1, his daughter was used as an example during the research section in chapter 1. She's a sociology researcher now. Alice Goffman is her name, and she did a lot of work, if I'm not mistaken, she did a lot of work with homeless folks in Philadelphia, I believe it was. We can flip back to chapter 1 and refresh our memories about that. But anyway, her papa is Erving Goffman here, and he's a very famous micro-sociologist. And he talked about presentation of the self in daily life and how all of us follow a social script of sorts, okay? So he said social interaction is similar to a script for a play or a movie. Here's where this phrase social script comes from that I used all last week and kind of never told y'all what it was all about. So in social structure, where we have macro scale social institutions, such as, give me an example of some social institutions. Education. Yes, say government, yes. Don't say school, say education system. Why do I say don't say school, say education system?
Because there's more than one type of education system.
Social institutions is on this side of our big social structure picture. And what was on this side? It's the difference between macro and micro scale. Thank you, Des. That is exactly what I'm looking for. And y'all were on the edge, right? So education system is a whole bunch of collections of lots of different schools, lots of different daycares, lots of different after-school programs, lots of different colleges and universities, right? So education system is a macro scale statement. That's a social institution. I heard you say government. Government is a macro scale social institution. Family, the concept of family, people having children, caring for those children until they are old enough to care for themselves. Please, one day, they can take care of themselves, right? It's what my husband and I say sometimes about some of his, right? When are they going to be able to do this? Okay, so these kinds of things are on the macro scale. But those macro scale issues, family, education system, government, religion, the economy, they give us statuses and roles in society. We occupy those statuses, we play out those roles, and the people in our primary and secondary groups are the people that we are accountable to for those statuses and roles. You'll see that connection, that link? So if I ask you about the connection, about the links between the macro scale side of social structure and the micro scale side of social structure, you're going to need to tell me some kind of iteration of what I just went through with you, okay? You use your words, not mine, and just tell me, well, it's connected in this kind of way, and show me how it flows. So Irving Goffman talked about the micro scale side. Because if we get statuses and roles from macro scale social norms, macro scale social facts, and we live out the duties associated with each of those statuses, we live them out in our social groups, how do we know whether we live up to the standards that are set on the macro scale? And so that's through interpretation of one-on-one behavior, interpretation of verbal and nonverbal communication, and knowing what's in the script that comes from the macro scale, kind of. So Irving Goffman came up with a method for analyzing daily social behavior, and he called it the dramaturgical analysis of daily life. Not just daily behavior, but daily life. I don't know about you, but I just never have liked that word. That word just looks ugly to me. It sounds ugly to say it. Dramaturgy, does it? Yeah.
Sounds made up.
It isn't made up. It's a real word.
I know. I just said it.
I know. I when I make up a word, it's prettier than that, I hope. But anyway, dramaturgy really is the study of things that are scripted. Okay, so dramaturgy is a play, it is a movie, it is even a reenactment of reality, right? Dramaturgy. So it's a real word, it's just an ugly word in my opinion. But maybe because it's spelled so weird, maybe because it sounds so weird, it's easier for us to remember it, okay? So remember the drama part at the beginning, because that should help with the theater words, that should help make you recall the theater words that come behind this, okay? So the dramaturgical analysis of daily life is a way of interpreting behaviors day to day, where it looks at all of us as actors on a stage. We examine daily behaviors as though we are actors on a stage. We already know that actors have a script. There is a social script that actors follow, or actors in general follow a script for the movie or the play, right? If we're talking about daily social life, then the social script is something that you and I are prepared to follow through the experiences that we learn from during our socialization process. You have learned in your socialization process since kindergarten or pre-K or wherever you started, daycare, whatever kind of organized schooling that you experienced in the education system growing up. You learned the social script appropriate for classroom behavior, and you are exhibiting it right now. If you had not learned the script appropriate for classroom behavior, I would be able to tell, your classmates would be able to tell. I'd have to say, sit down, you're not doing right, stop asking too many questions, you're interrupting too much, I need you to leave the classroom, right? Like, that's what happens if somebody's not following the social script. Now, in my syllabus, did I give you something that was called the script section that said, do this every day? No. I kind of don't have to, because up to the point where you adults end up in my classroom, you've gone through, how many years have y'all gone through school by now? 13 if you went to kindergarten? And how many would that be if you started out like when you were before one in a daycare, right? That you can technically consider part of the school system. So some of you have had like 18 years worth of school already, and you've learned the script of how to be in a classroom, right? So this script is a key term for whether we're talking about a play, a theatrical performance, a movie, but it's also a term that Irving Goffman uses for daily life. What are some other theater words that you all know about that you have to have for a play to come off without a hitch?
A setting?
A setting. You need a setting or you need a scene, right? So you can use either of those words. The setting is like the backdrop, right? The scene is like the mood. So you need a setting, you need a scene if you're on a stage. What else? You need cues, excellent. You need cues. Is everybody you just wake up and you're just ready for that script, or what has to happen? You need a director in some cases. All the agents of socialization can be your director, right? So you need directors, and that's where those leaders come in, right? What about, do we need some stuff to happen in the backstage? Because there's some things that an audience, do we have an audience in daily life?
Yeah.
We have an audience. There's some things that the audience is not supposed to see. Like, for instance, before you come to class with me in the morning, you need to have your public clothes on instead of your pajamas. Don't bring your public clothes with you here and change into them in the classroom, because that's backstage prep work that needs to be done. Don't bring your dental floss with you and sit in class and floss your teeth, right? Those are backstage prep things that that should be happening in private or with only a few people who have a different kind of social relationship with you than your secondary group members, like this classroom, right? Okay, so there's an audience, there's some stuff that can happen in the front stage, supposed to happen in the front stage. Y'all know that word, bloopers? Do bloopers happen?
I guess.
Sometimes bloopers happen, right? Yeah. What are some other stage words? There's some others that we can think of, but all of these words factor into how Irving Goffman analyzes daily life. So he is examining social structure, but he starts with the very tiny micro-scale side of social structure. He starts with the primary groups and the secondary groups that we are involved in. We talked about primary groups being characterized by emotional connections, very frequent social interaction, bonds of love and affection, smaller numbers of people, right? People in our primary group can be our audience for lots of different things that we do in life. Usually people in our primary groups as the audience, we allow them a different kind of insight into our backstage behavior than people who are supposed in our secondary groups who typically would be the audience for our frontstage behavior. Does that make sense? Okay, let's talk about this a little differently. Okay, so there's an important concept here that we need to talk about, and it's called impression management. And it comes under this. I'm just using all the space I can get on the board, but it's kind of like number one. Yes, bless you. There's part of the social script, right? You hear somebody sneeze, and the script is bless you. Okay. So kind of put this as number one. We'll have like, I guess, 4 different kinds of behaviors or behavioral patterns that we'll talk about under dramaturgy, okay, or the dramaturgical analysis. So impression management is the rest of this word here. Impression management. So it sounds, it means just like it sounds. So when we make an impression on somebody, what does that mean? The way that people are going to remember us, and maybe we want to make ourselves look good, like you said, right? So maybe we want to make ourselves look to other people remarkable or not remarkable. We want to maybe have some sort of resulting attitude from you about me, right? I want to behave as your teacher. I want to behave in a way that has the classroom under control, that grades papers regularly, that contacts you in return when you contact me, that has assignments prepared at the right time, has an organized system for presenting information to you in class. When I behave like that as the social script in the setting that I'm in, following the cues that I get, and doing all those things, do you have more confidence in a teacher like that, as a teacher, than others who you have to hound to get them to respond to you, and they never grade your papers, and you have no idea what your midterm average is, and blah, 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 right? So there's a different kind of impression, perception, if you will, of that kind of person. So impression management includes all of the efforts. It's like the preparatory efforts that we go through in our daily lives to try to get others to see us in a certain way. Let me see. It's efforts we go through in daily life. Not put it too close together. Efforts we go through in daily life to get others to see us in a certain way, in our preferable way. Here, we get to decide. When we were talking about master status and how society sees us, we said we really don't get to decide as much as we might think we want. We have control over. But with impression management, we can decide, do we want a favorable reaction from individuals? Do we want individuals to think we are a part of their kind of person? Or do we want to stand out as somebody who is not that kind of person, right? So in chapter 5, when it talks about reference groups, and in-groups or out-groups, those collections of people around us who we either want to be a part of, an in-group, or don't want to be associated with, an out-group, we learn from observation in our socialization process that group behaves like this. They do these kinds of actions. They dress in this kind of way. They use these kinds of vocabulary words. This group over here dresses in this way, speaks this way, behaves this way. And we can and do, according to Irving Goffman's analysis, we go through impression management regularly so that we will or won't be associated with the groups that we do or don't want to be associated with. The in groups and the out groups in our lives. Okay? Do you behave differently in a job interview than you would if you were having supper at your Uncle Tom's house? Do you? Yeah, do you behave differently with Grandma? Like I noticed in your letters to Grandma, you spoke to Grandma in a very different way than you would have if I had told you, make this a formal research paper and I want 7 academic sources for this information. Did you find yourself writing differently in your letter to Grandma than if I had said, formal research paper, MLA style, do it now, right? You had a different kind of appearance that you could convey, a different kind of script that you were following that was different than whatever teacher makes you do MLA research papers, right? I guess your English teacher. Okay? So impression management, can you think of an example? Any of y'all have an example of when you know that you make efforts to be perceived in one way and not another way in society?
Peers, like, I guess if you're a boss, for example.
In those leadership roles, good.
You just want your employees to see you in a certain way.
Exactly, and so that's one of the reasons why in Chapter 5, so he said, for your employees to see you in a certain way if you're a supervisor, right? If your employees have a favorable impression of you, are you going to have more effective, more happy, more cooperative employees? In theory, yes, right? And so those leadership styles can absolutely bring about a certain favorable or non-favorable opinion of you, okay? What else?
First date.
Do what?
First dates.
First dates. So first dates aren't reality? What? First dates aren't reality? Yes, first dates are a good example. Let me just tell you one for me. I hope my mother-in-law does not know that I have a YouTube channel, but whenever my mother-in-law comes over to my house, I always clean it up way more tidy than it usually is, okay? So there's some impression management. I go through, and if she only stays for about a week, I can keep up that charade, but if she stays a little bit longer than a week, it's like I start to slip just a little bit with my impression management, that I'm as neat and tidy as she seems to be when I go to her house. They are German, and wow, they want everything like this stack of papers that's kind of like this under there. No, that has to be very, very, at least that's my perception of the social script in the settings at her house. So I try to get a favorable opinion from her and do things like I think she likes them done, right? So there's some impression management. Okay, and the next 2 things that we'll talk about is backstage behavior. And again, these are ways of analyzing social life using these theater terms, okay? Backstage behavior and let's say frontstage behavior too. Backstage and frontstage behavior. So backstage behavior is kind of like the preparatory stuff that you don't want your general audience to see. So we'll use the word audience here also. So this is prep behavior, not intended for general audiences or however they say in movies, right? Prep behavior, not for public to see. Maybe only just very few people in your primary groups would see your backstage behavior. And probably not all of your backstage behavior should be seen by an audience, right? Are there some things that in our backstage that we don't want anybody to see? Like we don't even want our dog there, right? When we're doing certain things, right? So backstage behavior is any kind of prep stuff that you go through in order to present yourself to the audience. Who can we say is part of our audience? Who's our audience? Family in that primary group. Sometimes family can see some of the backstage behavior. But who else is audience throughout all of your daily life? Your peers. Right now, every single person sitting here in this classroom is part of Dessa's audience. I'm part of her audience. Okay, according to this. Okay, what else? Co-workers, again, are going to be part of your audience. And you are part of theirs. Right?
So anyone we have interaction with.
Anyone, not only those we have interaction with, because I'm glad you asked that question, because remember, excuse me, we have a very specific definition of social groups. It has to have, regular interaction, and the interaction has to be pretty frequent. We use these kinds of things to classify social groups. But when we were talking about social groups, I probably used people on an elevator going, to different floors. Would those people be part of your audience also? I see. Okay, I see some yeses. Why did you say? Why do you think no? Is there a script that you're supposed to follow with those people?
Do you really care what they think once you're off the elevator?
It's not about necessarily caring what they think, but is there a script while you're on the elevator? Are you supposed to? You maybe say hello, but I mean honestly, you don't normally speak. Yeah, you don't want to even stand too close. Yes, so the setting, the scene, yeah. So if there's just two people on the elevator and that eraser right there is one of them, I'm not supposed to get on and stand right here. I got all this other space, right? So even that's part of the stage directions, kind of, right? So Irving Goffman would say anybody and everybody. Even the people who are not in our primary groups, not in our secondary groups, but just aggregates of people, a word from chapter 5 that you've already read, I'm sure, or crowds, people shopping in the shopping mall, going to a concert together. General public, absolutely. In the general public, you're not really supposed to call attention to yourself. Bring me back to that in just a second, Jordan, about the general public thing. Let's talk about front stage behavior and the differences really quick, and then we'll do the general public thing. So front stage behavior is the stuff, the actions that are okay for the general public, okay for people in your secondary groups, okay for others to see. Okay for others to see. And here's that general public kind of thing. Are you supposed to stand out in the general public? I'm not asking this question well. Let me rephrase that. Well, Jordan, will you say, again, why did you say in the general public? Can you tell me more about
Because wherever you go, people are going to see you.
Wherever you go, anybody around you has the potential to see you, right? Okay, so anybody around you would be the general public. They're not necessarily in your secondary group. They're not necessarily in your primary group. They just all happen to be gassing up their car at that gas station at the same time, right?
You don't know how they see you can be their impression of you, even if you don't know them.
If they even see you at all. Think about this for a second. Assuming all of us pump our gas for ourselves, when we're pumping our gas, we might know there's 2 or 3 other cars with 2 or 3 other people pumping gas at the same time, right? But when we leave, do we really even know who they were well enough to describe what they look like? Well enough to describe what their cars were, well enough? I mean, we really don't typically have that kind of heightened situational awareness to notice. And we kind of aren't supposed to. Like, you'd notice me at the gas pump if I started singing Broadway show tunes and dancing while my gas was going, right? You'd be like, whoa, that's not part of the social script. Something's going down. Let me get the heck out of here, right?
I like, if I put my gas, I know it, I like observe, but like I'll forget by the time I leave. But if I'm there, I'll like be able to tell you like how to look, but if I were to leave, I forget. But at
Exactly.
that moment, I know.
At that moment, yes, but not later. So it's not part of like a permanent connection that you've made that affects you profoundly in your socialization process. But there's people there. They are in your audience, okay? So there are some times when you don't want to stand out. The social script is not to stand out. And there are some times when the social script is, yes, you're supposed to stand out or you're supposed to speak up or something like that, right? What is the show? Oh, what is that show on? I think it's on NBC. What Would You Do? Is that what it's called? Where they send a couple of actors out into... What is it?
I know what you're talking about. And see what they would be doing.
And see what they would do. Yeah, so like somebody, they'll send a couple of actors out, and they'll go to a restaurant, and I don't know, they'll be really mean to the waiter or something, and really loud. You know, they will intentionally do something against the approved of social script to see like if normal folks around them will say something and intervene.
I've seen one with a blind one. A woman took advantage of a blind man. She
Oh,
gave-
really?
He gave her 420s.
Oh,
She
yeah,
said
that would
he
be a
gave
big
her
one.
4 ones.
Yeah, that would be a big one. So if he couldn't see that he'd given her 420s and she gave him change for a different amount or something, yeah. So yeah, what would you do? That's that script. You're really not supposed to intervene at other people's tables. That's not part of the social script, right? They're not part of your audience, or you're not. You know, audiences don't usually interact with the main characters on the stage, but when your actions follow the social script of approved of behaviors, typically the social script goes along smoothly, and when they stand out as unacceptable, that's when you can see or you can measure, or that's why that show on TV is famous, right? We want to see, excuse me, whether we're going to intervene or not. So you're not, all of that to say that you're really kind of supposed to blend in the general public. When I'm walking through the halls here, I used to have a classroom way on the other side of the building over here, and I would walk through the hallway, and it had all this carpet on the hallway, and for some reason, I guess I don't lift my feet up high enough, but for some reason I'm just walking along, and it's part of the social script to just walk along smoothly, right? But I would constantly be tripping on that carpet. Like, jump up and grab me and make me trip. And I would the people around me noticed. And they weren't supposed to notice me. I'm supposed to just be walking along quietly. I'm supposed to just kind of be vaguely aware that there's others there, but not who you are. It's called, let me use this space on the board over here. It's also part of what Irving Goffman talked about. It's called civil inattention. Civil inattention. You know people are there. You know people are there, but they're not. You aren't supposed to stand out to them, and they aren't supposed to stand out to you. On the flip side, in the classroom, sometimes the script in the classroom is called civil attention, because you're expecting the teacher to ask a question, and if the teacher asks a yes or no question, it becomes very easy for the teacher to look up, and lots of students are going, yeah, or lots of students are going, no, and they really don't know what's going on. They have your civil inattention, right? So anyway, this front stage behavior has a lot of nuances in the script. The setting is the scene, the cues. In the general public, there's really not supposed to be cues that call attention to us. It's front stage behavior is for an audience to see when it's approved of behaviors that are part of the script. Questions or comments about that? final one. I don't have any more space on the board. It better be the final one, right? Face-saving behavior. What does it mean to save face?
Try to make yourself look good, not hide the bad stuff, maybe.
It is about making yourself look good, but it's more about you're trying to fix something that just went wrong, right? So face saving is like if something embarrassing happened, if something happened that's outside the script. So you're walking along in the hallway and you trip over carpet and you make a big noise. That's not part of the script, walking along the hallway. We're supposed to pass each other. We're supposed to kind of notice that there's other people passing each other, but none of us are supposed to stand out in that situation, right? So I trip over nothing and I kind of laugh at myself like, oh, that's clumsy me or something, right? I'll add that to the script as a face-saving behavior. I'm going to laugh it off, right? So face-saving behavior, it's the stuff that we do to try to regain our composure. It's to kind of rehab our image if something embarrassing happens. Try to regain composure. We did something outside the script for the setting that we were in. Maybe we did something that really should have been in the backstage, but we did it in the front stage. Maybe we said a blooper. Maybe we did any of these other theater words that are not part of the script. And we have to try to regain our image in the eyes of the people who are in our audience. Where does the script come from, y'all? Where does it come from? Society, the socialization process, norms, social facts, yes. All those things y'all are saying, yes. So the script comes from, we're back to a Monday of last week when I drew that award-winning picture on the board with all of this curly cues and all the connections, right? So social structure, society, macro-level social institutions like family, education, government, religion, the economy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's where norms, social facts, the social script comes from. The statuses and the roles that's kind of in between. It's like this link in between macro and micro. Student is your status. The role associated with it is come to class, do your work, be on time, et cetera, right? Pass, right? You're not a student, so you can make D's and F's. You're a student, so you can make C's and above, right? That's part of the social script for student. Then in our primary and secondary groups, our social groups over here, we get much more intimate behavior, much more personal with our primary groups, much more purpose-driven personal interaction in our secondary groups. And the pressure, you've heard of peer pressure before? The pressure about the statuses and roles that we occupy, we have to kind of live up to those expectations because other people in the audience have those same expectations of them. And so that's what kind of pushes us toward living out those expectations with our primary, our secondary groups, our reference groups, through building relationships through our leadership styles, through our emotional bonds, our expressive ties or instrumental ties with people. All of those things contribute to the social script. Now that y'all have taken a test with me, perhaps you can see more clearly now in the way I organize these notes, organize these lecture sections, that pretty much every day there's another essay question that we talk about, right? The answers that we talk about. So how is social structure on the macro scale connected to Irving Goffman's dramaturgical analysis of daily life? It's a pretty huge essay question. You got to start with that social structure description and then tell me about on the micro scale how the audience expects you to follow that. Do we always follow the behavior that's expected in the script, though? No, we don't. Sometimes it's unintentional, like me tripping in the hallway, but sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes we don't follow the script that this group expects of us because another group has a different script that we would rather follow. It can boil down to my subculture expects this behavior and your subculture expects that behavior, so we can see those differences in us, and maybe ethnocentrism can result. The difference between us and them, the otherness, comes from, in Irving Goffman's analysis, it comes from these scripts, all of these stage cues that we follow. What do y'all think? Does it make sense? Do you? Well, I'm glad that you can agree with me, but I'm presenting you Irving Goffman's information, so it sounds like you agree with Irving Goffman. You agree with him 100%? Yeah, because if I was as smart as Irving Goffman, then we would be opening up the next page and it would say, Mrs. T's theory about student success or whatever, right? But it doesn't. It says Irving Goffman's theory. So one of these days, right? One of these days, your kids will come home and they'll be studying Mrs. T's ideas about something. It'll be in a book someplace. But not yet. So it sounds like you like Irving Goffman. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Please speak up while I'm erasing, because look, I've got a lot of erasing to do. Do you think you could maybe use, like, here's an idea for a reaction paper this week. Do you think you could maybe use an objective analysis of your own daily life and use Irving Goffman's words and say, this is what I did in this setting, and then my scene changed, and so my behavior changed, or the costume. We could have put the word costume up there too, right? Because there's different clothing available, uniforms available for that are appropriate for different settings in our daily life. Okay, so now we are going to talk about something that I've said I think 4 times already in class just today, that not everybody always follows the script. Sometimes it's an accident, but other times it's intentional. Sometimes this group's script is different than this group's script, okay? Let me draw a picture for you on the board that I drew before when we were talking about norms back in chapter 3. This is more like a timeline than a picture, really, but for the definition of norms, I usually draw something like this. You have that someplace in your notes? Someplace you can do it again if you would like, or just refer to it when you have it in chapter 3 someplace. So, if I ever gave you this picture, you should be able to write me a sentence or 2 explanation for what this means. So who wants to practice writing me a sentence or 2 about what this picture represents? I didn't hear the first part of it.
Acceptable and unacceptable behavior are arranged, so while something may be more outside of acceptable in your personal range, it might be more towards unacceptable in somebody else's.
Okay, so essentially, let me repeat because the video doesn't pick up other people's voices. Okay, so acceptable, appropriate behavior are over here, and it's got a big range that goes with it. And so your behavior might be here, but somebody else's behavior might be here. And this can create the us versus them situation, right? But what about this, Kennedy? What if your behavior's here and somebody else's behavior is here? Is there another bug?
Yeah,
Is there another bug?
it's a
This is unacceptable behavior. This is unacceptable.
it's the same thing as last time too.
Okay, they seriously were supposed to have fumigated. Is it coming at, like, where are they coming from?
It came from like this way from under the table.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry that this is happening. I'll mention it again. Okay, so I think my question was, before the bug invasion again, I think the question was, if we are here and somebody else is there, from a social perspective, are both of us okay? Like, both of us are acceptable from a society's perspective. But are we still different enough from each other that we might not be okay with each other, even though society says we're okay in general? Yes. Okay. So this picture, to sum it up, describes norms, describes behaviors. Some behaviors are acceptable and appropriate in society. Some behaviors are not acceptable. They are entirely inappropriate in society. And then what's this middle section? I think we haven't talked about the middle section yet. We don't know yet. Yeah, because this side doesn't have all human behavior in it. This side doesn't have all human behavior in it. There's more human behavior here that maybe it's not part of our culture. Maybe it's part of this subculture's over here, or maybe it's part of culture in Vietnam, maybe it's part of culture in China, maybe it's part of culture in Venezuela, but it's not part of our culture here, and we don't know, would it be acceptable, would it be unacceptable if we did that here, right? So that's why we have this gray area. Okay, so I'm drawing this on the board for you one more time, because this is my norms picture. It's a picture of how we can describe what norms are in society. And norms are what make up that social script that we've been talking about. Norms. It's what makes up that social script. In chapter 6 has a new vocabulary word for you. The title of it, I think the title of chapter 6 is Deviance and Crime, I think. We're going to talk about the deviance side of chapter 6 in our last few minutes that we have together today. Deviance is a word that goes with norms. It kind of is like the word sanctions. Sanctions goes with the concept of norms. Deviance goes with the concept of norms also. Deviance is any behavior. It can be a belief or an attitude. It can be a condition, like homelessness. Deviance is any behavior, belief, attitude, condition that falls on the unexpected, the inappropriate side of norms in society. Any behavior, any belief, or any attitude, any condition that is unexpected. It violates the acceptable, appropriate side of norms. It goes against the acceptable, appropriate side of norms. It's inappropriate behavior, unacceptable behavior, deviance. How do we know something is deviant or something is acceptable? We can go right back to that idea that I just erased about the social script that we follow. We learn norms for our immediate social groups in our socialization process. Those norms might be here for our immediate social group. Those norms might be here for our immediate social group, or they might be here for our immediate social group. That's what we learn in our socialization process. If those norms are here, then usually we in our socialization process learn to be these things that are contrary or seen as deviant in our larger social structure. Does that make sense? Deviance, any behavior, belief, or condition or attitude that goes against what the expected norm is in society. Do norms stay the same everywhere in every culture all across the world? No is the correct answer. So norms differ from place to place. That's a true statement. So also we need to know that deviance differs from place to place. Deviance differs from place to place. Just like norms differ from one place to the next place. Deviance can be different from one group to the next. We can say that deviance is in the eye of the beholder. Have you heard that phrase, that beauty is in the eye of the beholder? You could say the same thing here. So deviance is specific to a group. In-groups and out-groups that we talked about in chapter 5 can be good examples of this. You are part of your in-group because you have similar behaviors to them. Your out-group doesn't have to be unacceptable from a society standpoint, but do you see how far apart you are within this bubble? And so they might seem odd, they seem wrong, they seem out of the ordinary to you. So deviance is specific to a group, okay? And also, here's an important thing. Deviance changes over time. Do norms change over time? Sure do. So certain things that are considered or that were considered inappropriate, unacceptable behavior 50 years ago are not necessarily considered inappropriate, unacceptable behaviors today. Somebody give an example of that deviance, attitudes about deviance can change over time.
Racism.
Absolutely, racism is not dead in our society, unfortunately, but attitudes about race certainly have changed. Absolutely. Were you going to say something?
I was just going to give a specific example of women's right to vote.
Okay, yes, absolutely. 100 years ago, actually, when women were fighting for the right to vote, it was because the idea was that women shouldn't vote. There was a different role in society. They had a different status, a different role that went with it, and being a participant in civic life, civic decisions, wasn't part of, it was here. It's like, what should we do? Women want the right to vote? What? Where does that go? Some people argued strongly, no, they shouldn't have it, it's wrong. And some people said it should be perfectly acceptable and we should get this.
Oh, that was your race this morning? That was kind of like the roles for the Gilded Age.
Oh, I see. Yeah, maybe so. Okay, the one that was on the board before class started? Yeah, I can see that. I was thinking about this question about how deviance changes over time. I was thinking about a more modern example, like, y'all's examples are great, but what about recreational use of marijuana?
I was going to say that, but
Were you going to say that? Well, I got to it first, so I get credit for it, not you.
Marijuana.
yeah, marijuana use, right?
Yeah.
Are there still some groups in society who will say, no, that's wrong? they're using that wrong thing as a deviant behavior judgment, right? And then are there some groups in society, to say specific to a group, that say it's perfectly fine, it's medicinal, it's part of nature, it's, you know, it's this, that, and the other thing, right? And so that's definitely something that has changed over time. Put your phone away. Maybe put your phone away. Deviance changes over time because norms change over time, attitudes change over time. Social change happens. Whether you use functionalism to examine social structure, conflict theory to examine social structure, symbolic interactionism to examine everyday life behavior and how that is totaled up to create society on the micro scale, regardless of what perspective you use in sociology, these things are true about deviance. It changes over time. One group is going to say one thing is appropriate and acceptable, while another group says, no, that's not appropriate or acceptable. And from one place to the next, it would be very uneducated of us to assume that norms stay exactly the same from one place to the next. And since norms within this picture has a whole section that talks about unacceptable and inappropriate behavior, well, that's the section where deviant behavior comes from. So, let's think about the connection between this and social structure. So, norms come from macro-scale social structure. Statuses and roles come from that. We occupy a status. We live out the role, the duties that go with it on a daily basis. And in our primary and secondary groups, that's where we live out those roles that go with the statuses that we have. Do we have peer pressure in those groups to behave certain ways that everybody else in the group approves of? Yes. If we want to continue to be part of that group, we tend to conform. What's the word conform mean? Conform?
Change your attitudes to match those of your peers.
We tend to match whatever the behaviors are. We go along with behaviors of the people in our groups who are important to us. If we have an expressive tie with these people, which is an emotional bond, we tend to want them to be happy. So we behave in ways that they behave. We tend to be approved of by them when we do it. If their behavior is over here, if we're approved of by them on a micro scale, are we approved of in general on the macro scale in society? No. That can cause us problems if we want to, well, that can cause us problems. Let's go back to that maze analogy. Society has a certain shape. There might be 2 or 3 different ways from this side of the maze to get out on the other side of the maze. But while you're trying to get out of that maze, are there a whole bunch of wrong turns? And you don't know they're wrong turns necessarily until you see the brick wall. You don't know they're wrong turns necessarily until you see a pit that you're going to fall into if you take one more step. You don't know that they're the wrong turn necessarily, because if everyone in your immediate social group is behaving this way, and therefore in your socialization process you learned this way too, you won't know until the world gets to be a bigger place for you. You grow in time, you expand those agents of socialization out into school, out into work, out into daily life in general, before you will get the kind of feedback about your social script not being over here in this side of the norms picture. Does that make sense? Okay. So for your reaction paper this week, you could, if you want to, not all of you will want to, but you could try to measure the limits of what is acceptable, appropriate behavior by trying to get sanctions from people. So for instance, there's a social script, right? And we just talked about how some things are appropriate in one setting and some things are not appropriate in that setting, right? Okay, so stop for just a second. Don't make me scream over you while you're putting stuff away. We've got another 3 minutes, okay? So try to assess the situation that you're in and do something that goes against the social script and see if you get any sanctions from people. For instance, one of my students one time went inside to order lunch at Taco Bell or something, and there was a long line, and he went in and said, he was brave, I wouldn't have done this. He went in and said, I can't wait in line, I got to order next, and he broke in line and took the order. Is that part of the social script? He got lots of sanctions. The person who was taking orders kind of didn't know what to expect. So went ahead and took the guy's order and went on, but he got lots of sanctions from all the people he broke in line from. It was usually verbal sanctions. What's wrong with you? There was some cussing, words that I'm sure y'all have never heard before, right? But anyway, and then he wrote about it in a reaction paper. This was my social script. This is what I should have done when I was needing a Whopper. But instead, I did this, and this is how people reacted around me. That's how I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that it wasn't gray area behavior I was doing. It was over here. Okay? Another one of my students, y'all will like this too, and I'm sure all of you are going to search as soon as you leave class for the app in the App Store. But you can go to the App Store and download a free fart generator at your convenience. And so did you know it was a he when I used the word fart?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, he downloaded this generator, and he went into, I don't know, Walmart or someplace, I don't know, and went into like an aisle where there were people shopping, and went right up beside him and hit the button, and it went whatever noise, right? And he looked to see, how did people react? Did they get sanctions? Little girls reacted the most violently to like little 6-year-old girls, and like 6-year-old, he said, that age group of like little boys just would die laughing. Like the sanction he would get from little boys would just be dying laughing, and then like little girls would be just open about how horrible person this was to do this, right? So anyway, if you would like to do some sort of social experiment, remember Chapter 6 is called Deviance and Crime. I am not telling you to do something criminal in public, but if you would like to download the fart generator and see how little girls react, you can write about it in a reaction paper. Use your reaction paper opportunity to talk about the social script, all of the dramaturgical analysis, all of the acceptable, appropriate behavior in those settings that you go through from one situation in life. Okay? Alrighty, see y'all on Wednesday. Look for that announcement from me in Blackboard that I